And to establish 2 commandments. Love God and love your neighbor as yourself. And what has happened is we've allowed money to become so scarce for most of us that our survival is predicated on it, and so we have become slaves to it. So once love of money may have been the root of all evil, but society has progressed to the point where they have made money in its current capitalistic form.
Fiat form.
Evil. Yes.
It is the capitalistic fiat form. Yes, folks, and we're going to continue this discussion tomorrow. And we're also going to bring it to the cannabis front. As some of you know, I'll be talking on 420. I'm the last speaker before Vivian at the event that Jacob Stone is sponsoring. And Troy will be there as well. So more on that later. And Attorney Scott Stafne, Church of the Gardens. Peace.
And not having relief when they go to the courts where you're supposed to have justice and you're supposed to have equity and you're supposed to be able to have fair treatment. And what we've seen over several years, ever since the great financial crisis in 2007 to 2009, was we've seen many steps taken, not just by courts, but also our legislator, with making it easier to take people's property. Yeah.
And I'll be speaking on 420 at a rather large event, and discussing the possibility of bringing people who've had property wrongfully taken from them, property and means of livelihood. A lot of the original cannabis medical people, this happened to them. All the collectives, all the blacks, and except for the cronies who got in with the Liquor and Cannabis Board, they're doing just fine.
The verse of the Bible that talks about don't cast your pearls before swine because they may turn and rend you. And I think our courts have evolved into kind of a system that suffocates truth.
I returned to my old stomping grounds, and I'll tell you what. This is a great training facility because tennis season is coming up, and I need to have these quick steps, right? And there's not a lot of places to really do steps anywhere, right? So anyway, the hip is doing well. So the hip is doing well. This is my 3rd run. So here we go. Yeah. Fuck. Okay. That's not bad for 3 runs. Yeah. I worked out a little bit this morning too, but yeah. Okay then. So anyway, this was like a really good place to take a drive to from Mount Vernon and sprint those. I used to do like a total of 8 runs in a day and whatever else, but that's good. That's good. Yeah. The KingCast Trail of Tears. Hi, Pepper. Say hi to the people. Okay, thank you. And Dan, I understand you are the chairman of the board at the Church of Gardens.
I am one of the board members, yes.
Tell us about the Church of Gardens and how you came to know Attorney Stafne.
Yeah, so Church of the Gardens, one of its primary parts of its mission is helping those who are poor and oppressed dealing with property issues, meaning ownership, and having their property taken from them when it doesn't follow law, and not having relief when they go to the courts where you're supposed to have justice and you're supposed to have equity and you're supposed to be able to have fair treatment. And what we've seen over several years, ever since the great financial crisis in 2007 to 2009, was we've seen many steps taken, not just by courts, but also our legislature, with making it easier to take people's property when there's not documentation of chain of title, there's not documentation of ownership. In other words, you have parties that are being alleviated and making it easier to take a homeowner's property that doesn't have a legal right to do it. And so what we're seeing is this is greatly exasperating homelessness. It's displacing homeowners, whether they're individual people or families or multi-generational, and they don't have relief when they go to traditional attorneys that don't practice the area or they don't have the expertise. So at Church of the Gardens, that's one of our fundamental issues, is providing reliable legal care and assistance for navigating these challenging times.
So let's go back to the proof burden shifting. So you may not know that I used to run a title company. I wrote for Chicago Title and WAMU, ironically enough, when I was out east in New Hampshire.
Okay.
Now, since that time, I started Mortgage Movies, which are still on YouTube, but my website mysteriously disappeared. And on Mortgage Movies Journal, I would talk with Attorney Stafne and other attorneys who were fighting the good fight. I'd go into court and ask questions. I'd grill the attorneys in court about these issues. But I want to focus right now on the shifting proof burdens that you're talking about, and because I've seen it as well. Why don't you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Well, what's happened is, like in the state of Washington, they did away with what was called the Torrens Act as one measure. The Torrens Act was an old law from before any of us that are alive now were born. But what it did is it said that land registration for ownership had to follow certain procedures and certain documentation to show ownership and any change of ownership. And what we saw was that our legislature was lobbied by the banking industry to do away with the Torrens Act in Washington state to make it easier for not just banks but for servicers to allege a right to take a property when they didn't have a legal reason to do it and they didn't have a proper chain of title. And our legislature actually enacted laws just recently to do away with the Torrens Act to make that easier and help facilitate lenders, servicers, and banks to take properties when they don't have proper documentation. And this issue comes most glaringly when you have folks that are going through financial difficulties and they're trying to be able to defend, and they want to be able to have a reason to be able to stay in their property or find a resolution to it, and they're not given those options. They're just looking at people that are just trying to take their property and score a big win. Absolutely.
I believe the whole thing was designed from the beginning. You know, if you look back to see what was going on in those metrics, they have actuaries who knew a certain number of people will default on these loans. I think it was all a planned massive land grab. But let's move on to another topic, though. I do a lot of work in cannabis, and so the Church of Gardens is also involved in that as well. An aspect of the Church of Gardens was founded on cannabis. And I'll be speaking on 420 at a rather large event, and discussing the possibility of bringing people who've had property wrongfully taken from them, property and means of livelihood. A lot of the original cannabis medical people, this happened to them. All the collectives, all the blacks, and except for the cronies who got in with the Liquor and Cannabis Board, they're doing just fine. And we're talking quasi-criminal people, like I can name names. You know, the Khalifa family, the Widmer family involved with Khalifa. There's the guy here right in Arlington, Dennis Turner, the Cloud 9. That's a false story, a false narrative was told about him, saying that he was a new cannabis equity person. He's been around forever. He was involved in negative litigation years ago. You know, so they have their cronies in place. But my point here is that my friends, my people who are legitimate practitioners of the craft, they need representation as well. And so we may be approaching you about that.
And obviously what we've learned and it's just been recently for more mainstream folks is there's lots of medicinal use of cannabis that goes beyond just pain relief and other things that people can use for that. There's certain values that, and for folks that are that in the past have been adjudicated unjustly or have issues with being able to be around that. They need to be able to have a voice too to be able to help them.
That's right. And as a matter of fact, Jacob Stone is the primary sponsor of this event that's coming up on 420, Cannabis Funk, and so he will look forward to meeting you. And as well as Troy Anderson, I think, is doing the promotionals on this. So I'll make sure to get this out to them. And do you have any parting words for us today?
Well, we realize that the work of the church is more than just teaching and education, and the work of the church is helping people. And sometimes that crosses boundaries that maybe some people don't have experience with, or they have a idea in their head of what it can and cannot be. But we're here to help people and people that don't find that in traditional roles. And so we want to be able to help the folks that run into those roles and be a resource for them.
That's terrific, absolutely. And we're closing out now with KingCast, lifestyle, courts, justice, anything you want to call it today. And we'll see you in the next round, folks. Thank you. Attorney Stafne, do you have anything to comment on? No? Just quick, briefly?
That a judicial officer, in order to be an Article III judge, had to be appointed during his good behavior, which essentially meant he was supposed to be appointed for life so that he or she could decide based on their own conscience and based on their own relationship with God, what the result should be. But they've changed that. They've created these senior judges who get appointed every year by other judges. They don't have that independence that our founders intended. And
but what if they argue? What if they argue? Well, listen, if the judges are appointing these senior judges, then aren't those judges who are doing the appointing, aren't they bound by the same call of duty? So what's the problem? To play devil's advocate.
Okay, the problem is they are beholden for their jobs on the appointment of other judges. And the whole reason for making good behavior is so you didn't have that type of dependence. And you can see that if you